DJ Scream, heavy in the streets.
We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood. We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood.
Hood rich.
Get it out the mud.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And this evening, we have some appetizers for you, and they're pretty good appetizers. There could possibly be historic appetizers, just depending on the outcome of the main event, because they're such superstar fighters in Jones and Stipe Miocic. And what I'm talking about is UFC 309, Jones versus Miocic. Which that will be November 16th, 2024. So Saturday coming up, and it is 9 Central, 10 Eastern time. We had the time a little messed up on UFC 308, thinking it was at the standard time, but didn't take into account that it was in Saudi Arabia. But this is 9 Central, 10 Eastern time, because it is in UFC famous, probably the most famous venue for UFC events, and I'm talking about Madison Square Garden, New York City, New York, United States, and just some of the best fights and pay-per-views have happened in Madison Square Garden. One of the first places that really allow UFC and mixed martial arts to go mainstream. But this card, it's kind of similar to UFC 308. Obviously, not the start time, but just the kind of the lineup where it's got just like one title fight, and then you have just kind of a mixture of kind of soon to be stars, kind of former stars. The difference in this card from UFC 308 is that there's some more notable names on the early prelims and the preliminary cards. Just go through those real quick before we get into the main card. But we have a Mickey Gall. He's fighting at welterweight, and then you have a heavyweight bout. Marcin Tybura, he's fighting. So those are just kind of some notable names just on the early prelims. And then on the preliminary card, you have Jim Miller versus Damon Jackson, and then you have Chris Weidman, former middleweight champion, versus Eric Anders. So that's a little bit of the difference. That's about really kind of the only thing that makes this card maybe a little bit better than UFC 308 is that you got some more notable names. There's some more watch value in the preliminaries and early prelims, but the main card kind of is similar. You know, it just has like one good heavyweight fight, maybe more notable former champs and champions. A lot of people would say that John Jones is the GOAT fighter, UFC just hands down, and then some would say Stipe Miocic gets the GOAT of the heavyweight division. But then it just kind of, then it's kind of some fighters that are kind of up and coming, and seems like some of these matchups are kind of set up to where you get some of these younger up and coming fighters to kind of get almost kind of a guaranteed win or a guaranteed stoppage against someone that's a little bit more of a name, just to add to their resume before they start getting into the top 15, top 20 of their weight division. But it seems like they're kind of set up for them to win, kind of facing kind of jags and cans and stepping stones. But hopefully that all amounts to at least some good fights and some stoppages, just like UFC 308, who to me was the last real good pay-per-view since UFC 300. Not necessarily because of name value, but just the fights themselves, and you got some stoppages, you got some knockouts and submissions on UFC 308. And I think this card is very possible and has that kind of build up as well. But let's get into this card. So can I get a menu? So let's get into the main card here of UFC 309. So the first fight on the main card is it's a catch weight of 165, and I thought this fight was originally supposed to be a lightweight bout, And I don't know why they've already switched it to a catch weight like a day before actual weigh-in. So I guess no one's officially missed weight yet to make it into a catch weight, but seeing that it's already listed at a catch weight, I guess that's what it'll be. I'm not sure why they changed it to that exactly yet, seeing how no one's weighed in overweight or anything. But it's a catch weight of 165. Mauricio Ruffy versus James Allen on top, and Ruffy, he's got a really impressive, uh, impressive resume. But both of these fighters, Ruffy and Ellen Top, are both strikers, preferably. But what I'm talking about with Mauricio Ruffy, he's 5-0 in his last five fights, and is on a five-fight winning streak on top of that. And he has won two fights in the UFC already. So he's on a two fight winning streak in the UFC. And what's crazy about him is that like every single one of his victories and his one loss all came by TKO or KO. So he's a 10-1 in his career with 10 knockouts and one loss by knockout and then no submission. So like I was saying, some of these are like kind of not as familiar or notable names. It seems like they're being put in position and they're being put on the main card of a pay-per-view to get them to be known and well known. And then they're kind of matched up against fighters that they should win against, should beat, and maybe should have an impressive performance against. So James Ellentop is that person, is that profiled fighter that's fighting Mauricio Ruffy, and he hasn't had quite as much luck in his last five fights. So he is 3-2 in his uh, last five fights, and then he's just 1-2 in his UFC career, having lost his last two fights by submission loss and a decision loss. And just because of the fact that they're kind of similar strikers, you would just kind of automatically think Mauricio Ruffy has the best chance of winning this. But they have similar skills and definitely prefer to strike and try to get the knockout because James Ellentop, he's 14-4 with 14 losses and 14 wins and four losses. But in seven of his 14 wins, seven of them have come by way, by way of, let's see, by way of, yeah. So let me see here. Yeah, so seven of those fights have come by knockout, and then one win by submission, and the other six wins by decision. And then he's never been knocked out, but he has been submitted twice. So even just the win losses there, he shows that he's pretty tough. Hasn't been knocked out, James Allen Top, but it seems like he's had a little bit more trouble defending and getting submitted. Seeing how one of his most recent losses was a submission loss to Chris Paldelia. But just going off of this, I think they'll definitely both come out and try to see who the better striker is. If I was to guess who may be the first to try to take it down and try to go shoot for a takedown or try to wrestle, I would guess that it's going to be James Ellentop, just because he's had more fights and he's a little bit more of a veteran than Mauricio Ruffy, and Ruffy really hasn't had to rely on anything but just knocking people out. 10 of his wins, 10 knockouts. So in this catchweight bout of 165 between Mauricio Ruffy versus James Ellentop, I'm picking Ruffy to keep his winning streak alive, to bring his winning streak to six wins straight, and add just a ridiculous amount of knockouts to his resume, and add another one here. So I'm picking Mauricio Ruffy versus James Ellentop to win this, and I predict that he's going to win another fight by knockout. All right, now then on to a women's flyweight bout between Vivian Aronjo versus Katrina Silva, and I think Vivian Aronjo may be considered by some the favorite in this bout. And this is kind of similar to the first bout on the card, how the first two fighters on the card were both strikers, so it was striker versus striker. Well, this fight's kind of similar, but it's the other style. It's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tacticianer. But and they're both names that aren't overly notable. I would say that Vivian Aranjo definitely is more of a UFC veteran. She's had actually several fights in the UFC. So she's had 11 fights in the UFC, just kind of around 500 though. In her last five fights, she's only 2-3, and lost her most recent fight to Natalia Silva. So I don't know if Katrine Silva and her are related, but uh, so I guess she's fighting another Silva here. But she has 18 fights in her career with 12 wins and 6 losses. In the 12 wins, she's had 3 wins by knockout, 4 wins by submission, and 5 wins by decision. And then in the 6 losses, she has one loss by knockout, no losses by submission. So you've just seen from her wins that she can win by knockout, win by submission, and win by decision. So she's definitely a true mixed martial artist that relies on her Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So, but she has a good submission defense, which probably come in handy versus Karine Silva. And then her the rest of her losses had just 5 of her 6 losses came by decision. And this will be, all fights start standing up, so it'll be interesting to see who gets the better of at least the striking and the start of the fight. But I would say both of them would prefer to show off their skills and hopefully be better at what their name has been kind of made off of, which is the ground game. But Karine Silva is an impressive prospect, and like I was saying, she's kind of up and comer, with an impressive record and just trying to get a bigger name, I guess, added to her resume. But she has and she's 5-0 in her last 5 fights, and is on a 9-fight winning streak and has won all 5 of her fights in the UFC. She has 22 matches, 18 wins, and 4 losses. In the 18 wins, she has 9 knockouts, which that's very impressive for a 125-pounder to have a knockout ability. But then she also shows off her great Brazilian jiu-jitsu and ground game with having 8 submissions and then 1 win by decision. And then in the 4 losses, she's actually been knocked out once, but she's also been submitted twice. So even though she relies heavily on her ground game, she has shown, unlike Vivian Aranjo, that she can be submitted. And then she's been also had 1 loss by decision. But both of them have had quite a few fights in the UFC. Vivian Aranjo has had more because she's had 11-5. So I think getting this win over her would really help Karine Silva like catapult into notoriety. People will start knowing who she is, especially if she gets an impressive win. And that's how I definitely look at least these first 3 fights on the card are. It's kind of set up to be an exciting fight and hopefully get the up and coming prospect to get an impressive win. So in this women's flyweight bout between Vivian Aranjo versus Karine Silva, I'm going with Karine Silva. And even though she has so many knockout wins, and that shows that she has knockout capability, 125 pounds, and then Vivian Aranjo has never been submitted, I still feel that when it comes down to it and it comes to a tough fight, which this will be maybe the toughest fight of both of these women's career, I think you always kind of go to your biggest strength. So In this women's flyweight bout between Vivian Aranjo versus Karine Silva, I'm going with Karine Silva to win this, and I think she's going to win by submission and add a ninth submission win to, to her young career, being only 30 years old. All right, and now then on to middleweight bout between definitely a notable and more known kind of young up and coming fighter versus a UFC veteran, someone that who could be considered a stepping stone or kind of coming to the at least coming to the end of their career, and but is a big name which would help this young fighter uh, boost their resume and notoriety, which they've already kind of have been very impressive in their in the fights that they've had in the UFC. And I'm talking about a middleweight bout between Bo Nichols versus the veteran and Paul Craig. And we all know that Bo Nichols has just kind of an elite freestyle wrestling. He's a great wrestler, but he also, given the chance, he has some knockout power and some vicious ground and pound. But he doesn't have a super long resume. He's has 6 matches in his career, and he's 6-0. So he's 6-0. So he's obviously 5-0 in his last 5 fights, and he's just 6-0 in his entire career. But in the 6 wins, he has 2 wins by knockout, and then 4 wins by submission. So he's definitely using that wrestling game to get opponents down in precarious submissions. Situations, and for the most part, he's been choking people out. Cody Brundage, rear naked choke. Uh, Jamie Pickett, arm triangle. Devin Beard, triangle choke. Zachariah Barango, rear naked choke. So definitely shows that's his main path to victory. And then he's going up against Paul Craig, who also has a great resume for his ground game and submissions. Really, really impressive. Has to be right up there with the most submissions in the middleweight, I would assume, in the UFC. And he's on kind of a rough stretch. Like I said, he's a older fighter, but a very well known and notable name, but is kind of on a rough stretch, kind of being fed to the young wolf, waiting to take him out, because he is just 1-4 in his last 5 fights, and so he's on a bit pretty not a great winning streak, and he's lost his last 2 fights. All the 2 of those losses have come by knockout, and one by a rear naked choke, which that's definitely what Bo Nichols would probably be planning to do in this fight. But it's definitely be an interesting fight just to see how Paul Craig's ground game matches up to Bo Nichols, because he's shown a great submission game, because he's had 26 fights with 17 wins and 8 losses. And then in the 17 wins, he's had just 4 wins by knockout, but 13 wins and finishes by submission. So that's really what I'm most excited about seeing about this, is who ends up getting the edge in the ground game. I would imagine it's probably the young stud, but he definitely needs to be careful going in there, Bo Nichols, leaving his arm out there or leaving a neck out there, because Paul Craig will definitely jump on it, because he has submitted a lot of fighters. And the interesting thing there is that at least in his wins, he doesn't go to decision, and he's only had 1 loss by decision. So I would expect, no matter who wins this fight, that it's probably gonna not go to the judges. And then in his 8 losses, he has 5 losses by knockout, so he can be knocked out. And then he has 2 losses by submission. So even though he has such a great submission game, which usually translates to having a good submission defense, he can be knocked out. And in his most recent loss by submission, Brendan Allen submitted him with rear naked choke, which I could definitely see that happening to him in this fight against just the young stud in Bo Nichols. And then he has just the 1 loss that we were talking about by decision, his only fight that's ever gone to decision, and then just 1 draw. So this is kind of ground game versus ground game, but kind of different kind of styles of ground game. Bo Nichols is definitely pure, like a freestyle wrestler, and then Paul Craig is more just like a pure mixed martial artist with submissions mixed in, but also knows the 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 different the has the awareness of the striking being added into that. So he's more Brazilian jiu-jitsu and kind of a submission game. But in this middleweight bout between Bo Nichols versus Paul Craig, I got to go with once again, going with the young up and comer who's got quite an impressive win streak going against maybe the aging veteran that's had a little bit of tough time in their last couple fights. So I'm going in this middleweight bout between Bo Nichols versus Paul Craig. I'm going with Bo Nichols to win this, and I think he's gonna probably more than likely, I think he's going to choke Paul Craig out. I could definitely see Paul Craig losing another fight by rear naked choke. Now then, onto the co-main event, which this isn't a lightweight title uh, eliminator fight or an interim belt fight or anything, which that kind of I think that kind of devalues this card, UFC 309, a little bit, but still their former, at least Charles Oliveira's former champion, and Mike Chandler is a former champion contender. So we have a lightweight bout between Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, who Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler have already fought once in a very exciting fight that if you've seen any interviews with Michael Chandler, he pretty much uh, ensures you that he should have won that fight if it would have just been a couple more seconds in the first round where he was laying some pretty vicious ground and pound on 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 Charles Oliveira. That was farther back than I remember it being. Let's see. Huh. Right. Oh, looking at the wrong one. I thought I was looking at Michael Chandler there. See, I'm looking at Charles Oliveira. Yeah, so that was a long time ago actually. It doesn't seem like that was that long ago, but that was at UFC 262, which was May 15th, 2021, 2020, 21 versus Michael Chandler, where he ended up getting TKO punches over uh, over Michael Chandler, and that broke the record for most finishes. Uh, and he and Charles Oliveira won the vacant UFC light weight championship. Uh, but and since then, I think he missed weight and then had to give his belt up after that. That was against Justin Gaethje, even though he won that fight by submission rear naked choke. But Charles Oliveira in his last five fights, he is three and two. Yeah, 3-2, and he lost his uh, last fight by split decision over Arman Sharukian, and that actually was a lightweight title eliminator bout. But he's just a veteran and has such a veteran of mixed martial arts and UFC and been in so many fights. But they fought before, so it's definitely the more of a get back or a revenge fight for Michael Chandler, seeing how he thought he should have been able to get the stop in their first bout, but then with the ground and pound, if the round was would have just been a little bit longer, and then he was just a little bit too reckless in the uh, in the second round with this kind of reckless striking, and ended up leaving his chin out there for Charles Oliveira to connect and knock him out. But Charles Oliveira has been in 45 fights with 34 wins and 10 losses, and has 10 wins by knockout, 21 wins by submission, and then three three wins by decision, and then in a 10 loss, he's been knocked out four times. He's been submitted uh, four times and has lost two by decision. So it shows that, I mean, when you've been in as many fights as Charles Oliveira, you're bound to lose some, but it's shown that he can be beat in any way as well. He can be knocked out, he can be submitted too. and then he has the one no contest. And then Michael Chandler, who felt that he should have won that fight. I'm sure he's really excited about getting back in this, and this could put him back in at least the lightweight title contender spot at least. But he hasn't fought that much. It seems like because he's been waiting on Conor McGregor for so much. Since then, he's only fought like 3 times, but he hasn't been overly impressive in those in his last 5 fights. He's 2-3 in his last 2-3 in his last 5 fights, and his last fight was a loss to Dustin Poirier, where he was submitted rear naked choke. But I imagine he's going to go into this fight and be a little more conservative, not just looking for the one shot knockout. Because Charles Oliveira, he has good striking too, but also has a great Brazilian jiu-jitsu game. While Michael Chandler is a good wrestler, but he also has that explosive like one shot knockout ability, which was a gift and a curse when it came to the Oliveira fight, because he thought he was getting the knockout in the first round, and then he was just kind of over exasperated himself and put himself in danger trying to just go for the one punch or the explosive, just the overhand rights, and leaving his chin out there in the second round, where Charles Oliveira caught him and then eventually was able to finish him with some ground and pound. But Michael Chandler, he's also a veteran and been in a lot of fights as well. He has 31 fights with 23 wins and 8 losses. In the 23 wins, he has 11 fights won by knockout, 7 by submission, and then 5 by decision. In the 8 losses, he has 4 losses by knockout. So sounds like it would be easier or most likely you might just see another knockout of either one of these fighters versus Chandler or Oliveira. And then he's only been submitted once, and then has 3 losses by decision. But I'm kind of going off of the first fight where Charles Oliveira had a good chance to possibly get Michael Chandler in a rear naked choke, but Chandler showed good defense and was even able to pick him up and slam him on his back, which sometimes that ends up seeking in the triangle with the legs, and then if they're already got their arms around your neck, that can even sink that in deeper. But that ended up helping him get out of that in their first fight in the first round. But in this lightweight bout between Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, I think Charles Oliveira is going to win this again, because I just don't even think Michael Chandler is as good of a fighter as he was when they first fought. You know, that was almost 4 years ago, and Michael Chandler, he's been has had a couple fights since then, but seems like he's been more just waiting for Conor McGregor, which ended up just never happening. But I think this will probably still be an exciting fight. But I'm in this lightweight bout between Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler. I'm going with Charles Oliveira, and I'm going. This will be 4 straight finishes on this card that I could see happening. I think Charles Oliveira is going to win this over Michael Chandler. I think he's going to be able to get his back again, and is going to get the rear naked choke on Michael Chandler. That's what I see happening. So a couple chokes, finishes, submission victories on this card. Got quite a few submissions that I'm predicting here. Might be 4 in a row here. All right, now then on to the main event. We have a heavyweight championship bout between Jon Jones, the champion, just some people call the UFC GOAT fighter in general, just all UFC, not I guess you'd say pound for pound GOAT, and Jon Jones, who mine still personally is Anderson Silva, just because I thought it was so amazing back then. That was a little bit before USADA came in. And then Jon Jones, the champion, versus Stipe Miocic, who's looked at as just divisional wise as one of the heavyweight greatest of all times, because he has the most knockouts in UFC history, and has the most title defenses. I think 3 in UFC history as well. But this is a fight that maybe would have been a little bit more exciting to have seen maybe 5, 10 years ago, uh, due to more inactivity from Stipe Miocic, and then I guess injuries and legal problems with John Jones. But we all know about John Jones. He's pretty much undefeated in the UFC. Let's see. So obviously he's 5-0 in his last 5 fights, all was being when he was had some tough matches in those last fights, last couple fights in the UFC at light heavyweight, and kind of spread out quite a bit over the years, going back all the way to his second fight against Alexander Gustafsson, where he got the knockout, a win over Anthony Smith, split decision win over Thiago Silva, a decision win over Dominic Reyes, and then his debut as a UFC heavyweight, which was all the way back at March 4th, 2023. So that's been more than a year ago, like a year and a half ago. They had a very impressive and looked almost easy win over Cyril Gane, where he got the submission guillotine choke, had Cyril Gane pushed up against the cage, and hell, the second he set it in, Cyril Gane was tapping about as quick as you saw Robert Whitaker tapping the Hazmat Jemaya. But uh, definitely during his tenure and his reign as a light heavyweight champion, I would have called John Jones more of like a striker, like a kickboxer. But just seeing him in his first bout at heavyweight, I feel that he's been training more in like wrestling and submission game and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I think he may have that bigger advantage over some heavyweights. I think that may be a bigger advantage because a lot of heavyweights aren't quite as skilled on the ground as I would say John Jones is and has been able to become during a lot of his time off and getting prepared and being able to bulk up to be able to fight as a heavyweight. But he has 29 fights, 27 wins, just the one loss by disqualification, and then the 27 wins, he has 10 wins by knockout, 7 wins by submission, 10 wins by decision, and then one no contest. But showing his varied way of winning, and every fight he fights in, pretty much his whole career for the most part has been 5 round fights. And I guess in the last couple of years of, uh, of Stipe Miocic has been pretty much the same thing. It's either defending the belt or fighting for the belt. So he can go 25 minutes as well. But my main concern with him is that he's 42 years old and hasn't fought in 3.5 years almost. His last fight was where he got knocked out and seemed like he was on his heels like almost the entire fight, where he got knocked out by Francis Ngannou at UFC 260, which was March 27, 2021, and that was at the 52-second mark of the second round, which just that would be my main concern with Stipe Miocic. And you could say that about both these fighters, kind of, but I look at John Jones being he's 35, 36. So I don't know if inactivity will hurt him as much. Well, he's actually 37, so they're not that far off in age, but he's fought just a year and a half ago instead of like 3.5 years ago. But Stipe Miocic, in his last 5 fights, even though they're so long ago, he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, and he has a 25 fights with 20 wins, 4 losses. In the 20 wins, he has 15 wins by knockout, 5 wins by decision, and then in the 4 losses, 3 losses by knockout and 1 by decision, and then no losses and no wins by submission. So that kind of tells me I would think that's pretty clear that John Jones has the better ground game, and I could definitely see him going kind of straight to that, and him having a similar game plan to what he had against Cyril Gahn. So in this heavyweight bout between John Jones, the champion, versus Stipe Miocic, the challenger, I'm going with John Jones to win this, and I think he's going to be pretty dominant on the 42, have a pretty dominant performance and victory over Stipe Miocic, and I think he'll have a similar game plan to what he had against Cyril Gahn, because I think he just is so much better. And now that he's been off and has had one fight at heavyweight, I think his body has been able to better acclimate and he's in better shape now. I think well, that was a little bit of an issue when he hurt his shoulder, that he got out of shape a little bit. But I think he's taken time during his rehab and and just aging as a fighter to be in better shape. And I think he's going to use that game plan and use against Cyril Gahn. I think he's going to test the waters a little bit in the striking game. But if he feels Stipe Miocic's power at all, I think he's going to try and go for the takedown, and I think he'll be able to get a submission of some sort. So in the heavyweight bout between John Jones, the champion, versus Stipe Miocic, the challenger, I'm going with John Jones to win this. I expect him to win this by submission. So I almost look at almost every single one of these fights to be a stoppage. I definitely see a clear path for that, and looks like it may be a submission, uh, a, a main card of a bunch of submissions, which I'm here for. A little something different. But let's go over these picks real quick. So this is the main card only. In the first fight on the main card, we have a catchweight bout of 165 between Mauricio Ruffy versus James Allen Top. And I'm going with Mauricio Ruffy, who has just a crazy resume. I know it's not long in UFC fights, but just the fact that 10 of his 10 wins have come all of his 10 wins have come by way of knockout. So I think we're going to see another knockout, Mauricio Ruffy over James Allentop. And then in the women's flyweight bout, we have a Vivian Aranjo versus Karine Silva. And even though Vivian Aranjo is probably more of the UFC veteran and more of like a true mixed martial artist, her and Karine Silva have very similar styles and would like to rely on their submission game. But Karine Silva, even though Karine Silva has shown that even at 125 women's flyweight, she has knockout capability, and even though Vivian Aranjo has never been submitted, I'm going with Karine Silva to win this. I think she's going to win by submission because I mean, even though she has 9 wins by knockout, she has 8 wins by submission. So I think she's going to even that up, even up her 9 knockouts in her, and add a ninth submission victory over Vivian Aranjo. And then in the middleweight bout, we have Bo Nichols versus Paul Craig, but definitely a true UFC veteran and a true mixed martial artist. But I just don't think he's going to be able to survive just the wave and the early output pressure that you'll see from Bo Nichols. More than likely, just trying to take him down right away. Like Bo Nichols is maybe more like the powerful and more explosive striker, but Paul Craig is definitely probably the more accurate and more skilled striker, but also is dangerous, has 13 wins on the ground. So this is a fight I'm definitely intrigued about, just because want to see if Paul Craig's great submission game translates to having a defense against Bo Nichols' great wrestling game. But in this middleweight bout between Bo Nichols versus Paul Craig, I'm going with Bo Nichols to win this. I think he's going to win this by some type of choke. He's going to choke Paul Craig out, either rear naked choke or arm and head and arm triangle choke. It's going to be a choke. He's going to choke Paul Craig out. Basically, what I'm trying to say here. And then in the co-main event, we have a lightweight bout between Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, and this is the second fight between them. And you could have given the fight to either one of these fighters if the fight would have ended in the first round, because Michael Chandler looked great in the first round against Charles Oliveira, but has been a little bit inactive, waiting for Conor McGregor. And Charles Oliveira is still very dangerous, with Charles Oliveira having a ridiculous amount of wins by submission, and Michael Chandler having 11 wins himself by knockout. But I don't. I think Charles Oliveira's, now that he's fought Michael Chandler a little bit, and seeing how Michael Chandler's maybe a little bit older, and I guess your power is one of the last things that goes as a striker as you age. I still think Charles Oliveira will maybe have a better game plan versus Michael Chandler than in the first round of the first fight. So he won't put himself out there to get caught by any type of uh, devastating strike from Michael Chandler. I think he's gonna, even though he caught Michael Chandler in the second round of the first fight between them and got the knockout, I still think Charles Oliveira is going to win this, but I think he's going to win it by submission. And like in the first fight where he got on Chandler's back and Chandler did a great job of defending the rear naked choke, I think Charles Oliveira is going to get in that same type of situation and same area of the fight, but I think he's going to be able to finish this by submission. So in the lightweight bout between Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, I'm going with Charles Oliveira to win this by submission. I think he's going to be able to get the rear naked choke finish in this fight, like he came very close to in the first round of the first fight. And then in the heavyweight championship bout between John Jones, the champion, versus Stipe Miocic, the heavyweight goat, and then maybe arguably the uh, pound for pound goat, and John Jones. I'm just kind of going off of the fact that I think John Jones' game has changed a little bit to where like he doesn't even need to try to strike with Stipe Miocic if he doesn't have to. I think he has such a great submission game and wrestling, and if you look at Stipe Miocic's history, I mean, he's never been submitted, but he's also never submitted anyone. But still, never being submitted shows that he at least has the ability to defend it. But I also think he's probably never been put in that situation very often, except maybe the fights just being taken down. I guess some of the fights against Daniel Cormier, but that's about it. But I think John Jones, just in his absence, has been really training a lot in wrestling and submission games and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think that and inactivity is what will cost this fight for Stipe Miocic. Just the fact that he's 42 years old and hasn't fought in 3.5 years, even though John Jones is 37 and he hasn't fought in like a year and a half. But so in this heavyweight bout between John Jones, the champion, versus Stipe Miocic, I'm going with John Jones to win this. I think he's going to get the submission victory. I don't think. I guess the lightweight bout between Charles Oliveira and Chandler is it's a 5 minute round or 5 round fight. But I also think obviously the championship bout is a 5 round fight. But I don't think John Jones is going to need 5 rounds to get the aging and the old Stipe Miocic in a submission and be the first fighter in of Stipe Miocic's career to finish him. So I think in the heavyweight bout between John Jones, champion, versus Stipe Miocic, I think John Jones wins, and he's going to win by submission. So that's UFC 309, Jones versus Miocic. You got definitely superstars and former superstars in the heavy the in the main event. You know, that's really kind of what seems to be carrying and dragging this card kind of to a pay-per-view, because there isn't a lot of needle movers until after that, really. Besides, you know, I guess you got former champion and title contender and Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler for in the lightweight division. But after that, it's kind of just kind of up and comers, fighters that have a lot of potential, and if they could get an impressive win, it could possibly move them towards an opportunity to fight for a belt. But I look at this card, I've already said it, very similar to UFC 308, where it's not a lot of huge names. You know, real, I guess you could say some of the hugest names, because you got the GOAT and pound for pound GOAT and John Jones, and then the heavyweight GOAT and Stipe Miocic. But really, besides that, that's about it. But you have a lot of fights that are matched up to where it should be strength versus strength, and then kind of a can or a jag matched up against a young, vibrant, impressive, and fighters with a lot of potential that should get the win. If not by a submission or knockout, should be at least an impressive win by unanimous decision. But anyways, I'm excited for it. Besides just this weekend and on Saturday, we might get to see some more pound for pound greats. Maybe get a win that they haven't had in a long time. And I'm just talking about Tyson versus Paul, but I really don't know how that goes. But should have a great weekend to fight. Not just mixed martial arts and UFC, but maybe something interesting in boxing. At least hopefully it's a good script that they have written up, and maybe it'll go won't go Paul's way for once. Maybe it wasn't written to go in the agreements wasn't written to go his way. But anyways, I think that's about all I have for you. So can I get a check, please?